In this presentation, I want to discuss why it is important for the Church to orient itself towards the youth and what it means to prioritize youth. We will also look at some practical ways you as a youth leader can help your church to prioritize youth everywhere. So my first question, why it is important to prioritize youth? Firstly, we follow God's example when we prioritize our youth. In the ancient society, it was not typical to give attention and assign importance to children and young people. But God turned down that tendency on numerous occasions. He often chose younger brothers as objects and agents of His grace. He chose many young people to do extraordinary things for Him. Just remember Joseph, Samuel, David, King Josiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Jesus' mother Mary, Timothy, and many others. The prime example of choosing young people was Jesus. He chose 12 young disciples to train them for world-transforming ministry. Many biblical scholars believe that most of Jesus' disciples were under 20 years old. Jesus trusted them and invested in these young people. The second reason why it is important to prioritize youth is the fact that the youth work is missionary work of the highest kind. I believe that most leaders will agree that mission should be our priority. In that context, it is good to hear strong words by Ellen White. Very much has been lost to the cause of truth by lack of attention to the spiritual needs of the young. Ministers of the gospel should form a happy acquaintance with the youth of our congregations. Many are reluctant to do this, but their neglect is a sin in the sight of heaven. Why should not labor for the youth in our borders be regarded as missionary work of the highest kind? We should never put mission and youth ministry in dichotomy. Youth ministry is a missionary work par excellence. Thirdly, youth are the most receptive and the most open for the gospel. Several empirical studies have shown that more than 80% of all decisions for Jesus are made before the age of 25. This is also true for the decisions for or against the church. The adolescent phase has great significance for future life because it is characterized by serious reflection and formative decision-making. As a church, we should be there to help young people make good and wise life decisions. Finally, our churches will grow young if we prioritize our youth. Our reality is that most of our churches are growing older. 40 to 60% of our youth will drift from our faith community once they leave school. At the same time, we are not very successful at reaching unchurched youth. So our churches are aging, and the percentage of young people in our churches is much lower than that in the general population. Well-known research entitled Growing Young asks the question, which qualities are crucial if we want the church to grow young? After analyzing data from many churches that grow young, they identified 6 core commitments your church needs to grow young. The most crucial commitment is to prioritize young people everywhere. Instead of giving lip service to how much young people matter, we should look for creative ways to tangibly support, resource, and involve them in all facets of our church life. Growing Young researchers concluded, regardless of your context, our research has us convinced that the hinge point separating churches that grow old from those that grow young is priority. In other words, if we want to grow as a church, if we want our church to have a future, we should orient ourselves toward young people. In that way, we are following Jesus' leading, which is in the long term the most successful mission strategy. My second question in this presentation asks, what does it mean to prioritize the youth? In fact, may I ask you another question? How much would you give up in order to reach young people? If you really prioritize youth, you would do whatever it takes, except change our prophetic message. An experienced pastor once said, if you want to know the priorities of a church, look at their budget and other resources. Not only their budget resources, but also personnel, facilities, time, attention, and programming. They should all show that youth are our priority. Good leaders and programs don't automatically lead to priority. It's not only about hiring a youth pastor or choosing a good youth leader or setting aside a room in your church where teenagers can exercise their dominion. Prioritizing young people everywhere means more, much more. When you think about budget, strategy, worship planning, programming, community life, even theology, and all other aspects of church life, you think about young people. You intentionally pay attention everywhere. In order to prioritize our youth, it's very important to prioritize families too. We cannot engage with children and adolescents apart from the systems in which they are rooted, in particular their families. For decades, the practice in youth ministry was otherwise, but now the focus is on families for two reasons. Because parental influence matters the most. Parents have bigger influence than pastors and youth leaders. And also because parents need support, all the support they can get. Finally, to prioritize our youth means to consider them as our main partners. As we said before, God used many young people in the Bible for significant tasks. Youth, as our orientation, is not about churches just taking better care of the youth, but much rather about youth being considered real partners. The youth should be viewed not only as objects of our care, even more importantly, they should be considered as important subjects of church life. Young people should want to take part in forming and developing the life of the church. In this way, the church community keeps moving forward. Ultimately, the church possesses no greater source of potential for advancement than it's found in its youth. The Bible and the history of Christianity are full of examples of how God works together with young people and does exceptional things through them. So young people must play a load-bearing role. They should be involved not only in small secondary roles, but be asked to take heavy responsibilities. They should become purposeful co-participants in the life of the church, rather than just junior participants or future members. Their voices, hands, and hearts matter now. Lastly, I ask you, what can you, as a youth leader, do to help churches prioritize our youth? I'm sure you, as youth leaders, have a dream of a church that is growing young, not old, that is successful in retaining its youth and in attracting unchurched youth. But when we want to achieve that, we usually focus either on trying to find a new, better program, or we are focusing on helping youth ministry leaders to work better. I believe that solution isn't to focus just on better programs or on helping youth leaders. We should be aware that the youth ministry is usually like one-ear Mickey Mouse, attached to the church but not integrated to the church. By helping only youth leaders, we are not helping the church orient itself towards the youth. Therefore, in order to help the church prioritize youth, we should first work on changing the congregational culture. Growing young researchers have rightly noticed that to prioritize youth means steady commitment that becomes a lifestyle of the entire church. But this doesn't happen just by good leaders or in great youth programs. Most important is the congregational culture, and that is much deeper than programs. It's about the church attitude and attributes. It's about the value system. Culture change means building an overall ethos of investment in youth. In this context, I would like to recommend to you the ICOR, or Church of Refuge Initiative, as a good tool to work on changing the congregational culture. ICOR is based on several basic principles. First, family of God as the leading metaphor for the church. Secondly, an inclusive approach that welcomes all generations and cultures. Thirdly, youth as important partners of the church. ICOR has developed many useful resources, a study guide, short video clips, a church board guide, and many more. These resources are designed to help you, local church leaders, change your local church culture by discussing and implementing biblical values with everybody in your church. iCore isn't another program. It deals with the value system, what we are supposed to be, not only what we do. It deals with the entire church. It helps pastors, elders, and other local church leaders prioritize their youth. So my first practical suggestion is work on changing the congregational culture. Secondly, rethink the numbers. Consider evaluating the following numbers and see what picture emerges. Think about the ratio of young people in your community versus the ratio of young people in your local church. What percentage of your budget is currently allocated toward youth ministry programs? What percentage of the best staff is involved in the ministry to youth? Percentage of young people on stage? How many young people are preaching and having other significant responsibilities in the church? If we are really prioritizing our young people, these numbers should show that. Good intentions are not enough. Your intentions to prioritize youth should be intentionally put in action, and that will be visible in your numbers. The third suggestion, assess everywhere. Make a list of all current ministries in the church, analyze them, and see how many young people are prioritized in each ministry. The first question for every department leader should be, what will the young people do? How can we prioritize the youth in our department? This attitude should be present continually, not occasionally, not from time to time, but every week in everything what we do. Furthermore, when any new program begins, ask a simple question. How can young people be part of this? How is this appealing to our youth? Try to ask the youth what they think about that question and accommodate to their needs. My last practical suggestion, involve the best leaders in working with youth. Encourage your best elders and other leaders to invest their time ministering to the youth. These leaders should be focused on mission. And remember, working with your youth is missionary work of the highest kind. It will help your church to grow young.